We welcome you.
And you can hear?
The symposium organized by National Scientific Committee of Intangible Cultural Heritage in India. Historic towns, large and small, along with their natural and built environments, are documents that embody the values of traditional urban cultures, providing distinct identity. While traditional skills create the built fabric, historic towns provide space to intangible aspects in the form of crafts, practices, rituals, and local festivals. There are a lot of discussions about the interrelationships of tangible and intangible within these historic towns, but on ground, their holistic management is indeed a challenge. One of the reasons is also the lack of understanding of the complexity and pervasiveness of intangible values and of their relationship with the built fabric. The E-Symposium has been conceptualized to discuss historic towns to answer some key questions. 1. How do symbiotic association and multiplicity of values work on ground in context to the interrelationships of intangible to the tangible in historic towns? 2. How to augment the role of ICH for sustainable heritage management of historic towns. South Asia consists of various regions with overlapping histories and culture, with heritage rooted in their landscapes through rituals and traditions. This e-symposium intends to look into intriguing questions by bringing together experts and emerging professionals from South Asia, aiming to identify good practices in the management of historic towns and the issues of commodification of ICH in terms of tourism and its role in the economy of these towns. Thank you. We look forward to your participation.
Health option.
Greetings, eminent participants who have joined us today. I, Lakshmi R, Conservation Architect and EPWG South Zone Representative, ICMOS India, take this opportunity to welcome you all to the second thematic session of the E-Symposium on Intangible Cultural Heritage for Sustainable Management of Historic Towns in South Asia, Theory to Practice. The symposium is organized by the National Scientific Committee on Intangible Cultural Heritage, an emerging professional working group, ICMOS India, along with the Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, and Department of Architecture, IIT BHU Varanasi as knowledge partners. This e-symposium intends to serve as a platform for sharing and exchange of ideas that supports developing insights on the interrelationships between tangible and intangible elements, especially in the context of historic towns and the approach for good practice in South Asia. Spaced out into 5 thematic sessions, this symposium intends to bring together experts and emerging professionals from South Asia. Today's session focuses on the theme, tools and strategies, role of intangible cultural heritage in the sustainability of historic towns. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our eminent speakers. Dr. Gemini Vijay Surya, Special Advisor to Director General of ICROM, Rome, Director of ICROM Shanghai, President ICMOS Sri Lanka. Dr. Purnima Chauhan, IAS, Secretary Culture, former Director, Urban Development and Town and Country Planning, Himachal Pradesh. Dr. Shikha Jain, Founding Director, Drona, Vice President, ICMOS ICOFORT, and Expert Member, ICMOS IFLA. Architect Prasanna B. Ratnaike, Director, Architectural Conservation, Acting Additional Director General, Department of Archaeology, Council Member, ICMOS Sri Lanka. Dr. Jigna Desai, Program Chair for Masters in Conservation and Regeneration, CEPT University, Expert Member, ISC CV. Architect GSV Suryanarayana Murthy, Chief Architect at Kshetra, Professor at JBR College of Architecture. Architect Abdul Bari, Executive Director, AUDS. Dear speakers and participants, thank you again for being part of this webinar. I would like to introduce NSC Counselor of ICOMOS India, Dr. Arun Menon. Dr. Arun Menon is the Associate Professor of Structural Engineering at IIT Madras and holds a first degree in architecture and PhD in earthquake engineering from University of Pavia, Italy. His research interests are in structural aspects of historical constructions, earthquake behavior of historic masonry structures, earthquake-resistant structural masonry, and earthquake risk assessment. Dr. Menon currently coordinates the activities of National Center for Safety of Heritage Structures, a Ministry of Human Resource Development Government of India supported research center at IIT Madras. He was an expert member on the International Coordinating Committee for the UNESCO and has been involved in various conservation projects in India, Bhutan, and Philippines. Now, I request Dr. Menon to formally welcome the speakers and participants. Sir, you're on mute. Okay, can somebody make him the co-host?
One second, I will look at it. One second. Dr. Arun. He is the co-host now.
Yeah, thank you. Very good afternoon. Thank you for the invite to this program. To all my colleagues at ICOMOS India and colleagues of NSC ICH and the EPWG who have been behind this series, a well thought out series on sustainable management of historic towns in South Asia. Welcome to this second in a series of 5 events. The e-symposium format has really been able to bring a lot of expertise together in this format in a very simple manner, and it is my august duty on behalf of ICOMOS India and the Scientific Council of ICOMOS India. I joined my colleagues, the NSC coordinators of all the NSCs, 21 NSCs, and working groups of ICOMOS India, and the steering committee of the Scientific Council to welcome all of you formally to this second session, which focuses on tools and strategies in the sustainable management of historic towns of South Asia. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming the speakers, the distinguished speakers from our neighboring countries and experts working in India, Dr. Gamini Vijay Surya, Dr. Purnima Chauhan, Dr. Shikha Jain, Architect Prasanna Ratnayake, Dr. Jigna Desai, Professor Suryanarayan Murthy, and Architect Abdul Bari. I am absolutely sure that this session is going to be interesting, exciting, giving new insights on the way forward for sustainable management of historic towns in South Asia. What's fantastic as far as the events that are being coordinated by the NSCs in the last few months is the way several NSCs have come together to put their minds together on such important topics, but also the fact that we are looking at serious collaboration, not only between the NSCs and the EPWG within ICOMOS India, but also with institutions. And that's something that is being formalized in a rather wonderful way across these institutions. And in that context, my thanks to the Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, and IIT BHU, who are collaborators in this event. So without further ado, I wish the program a great success, and once again, welcome the distinguished speakers to this event. Over to you, Lakshmi. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now let me introduce Professor K.K. Pathak, who is the representative from Support Institute, IIT BHU Varanasi. Professor K.K. Pathak is the head of Department of Architecture, Planning and Design, IIT BHU Varanasi. His field of interest and work includes civil and architectural engineering with special reference to structural analysis and design, structural shape optimization, disaster management, earthquake engineering, and sustainable building technology. Besides teaching and research at IIT BSU, Professor Patak has been involved in various government, non-government, and academic institutions as a member of advisory committees and technical expert. He is the author and editor of many international and national journals. I would now request Professor Patak to formally welcome the speakers and participants.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Very good afternoon to all the dignitaries and all the participants of this symposium. It is our proud privilege for our department to be the part of this important event, which is connecting to several countries of South Asia. And as you know that this is a program on the sustainable development of the historic towns, cities, and Varanasi is one of them. So it is our privilege, and because this is a symposium, had it been physically, then I would have been great pleasure to support you, to be with you in Varanasi. So in future, I will request you that you organize this program in Varanasi so that we can do some service from our side. And we look forward for this type of collaboration. Ours is a new department. 2 years back we started. So we are learning in the process. And from your support, I would request that you support us because we are the new department and you are the great people who have worked in architecture. So your support is required for this department. So in this way, when I came to know that we have to join your program, very early our director and our top management, they gave us these things, green signal that you join this program. And I wish that in future also we'll be keep in connecting to you this program. So I once in the last also, I once again wish the very great success to this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now we come to the most awaited part of the event, the presentation by our speakers. The moderator for today's session is Dr. Rohit Jigyasu. Dr. Jigyasu is a conservation architect and risk management professional from India, currently working at ICROM as project manager on urban heritage, climate change, and disaster risk management. He was the elected president of ICOMOS India from 2014 to 2018 and president of ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Risk Preparedness from 2010 to 2019. Before joining ICROM, Dr. Jigyasu has been working with several national and international organizations such as UNESCO, UNISDR, Getty Conservation Institute, and World Bank for consultancy, research, and training on disaster risk management of cultural heritage. Now I would like to hand over the platform to Dr. Rohit Jigyasu and begin with our session.
Thank you very much, Lakshmi. Thank you for your generous introduction. It's indeed a privilege for me to be able to moderate this session. And we have, as you know, we have many very, very enlightened speakers here waiting to share their knowledge with us. So I would just like to give a brief introduction to why we are really having this theme, which is really focused on tools and strategies for tangible and intangible cultural heritage in historic towns. Now, before I go further, I would like to mention one of my own personal experience in 2008 when we had ICOMOS assembly in Malta. And someone mentioned that heritage should not talk about change because heritage conservation is about preservation. And then somebody rose and said that, no, we should actually talk about change. And there was so much of criticism because most of the heritage fraternity was really thinking in a very, I would say, Eurocentric view, had a view that heritage has to be preserved for posterity and change is not something that we should be talking about. So for long, heritage and development have been seen as two different ends, where if you talk about heritage conservation, you are anti-development, and if you are talking about development, then you are against conservation. So this was the kind of broader view. But things have been changing, and changing very fast in terms of, I would say, paradigm shift. Uh, now, ICOMOS itself in 2011 held a symposium called titled Heritage, a Driver of Development, during its General Assembly. And that was a very bold theme, I would say, because for the first time, there was an acknowledgement that heritage can actually contribute towards development. This kind of a change in attitude moved further with the adoption of sustainable development goals, which in fact, for the first time again, mentioned in its Article 11.4 that we should think of making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable by strengthening efforts to protect and safeguard world's cultural and natural heritage. Again, you see that very dominantly we are talking about uh, cultural heritage contributing towards sustainable development. And so this view has further got more and more strengthened, and more people are now really accepting that we have to think about really heritage as a contributor towards sustainable development. Now, I would say that in this symposium, we have this opportunity to really discuss how intangible cultural heritage can be articulated with regards to various dimensions of sustainable development. And we can really need to deliberate on what kind of tools and strategies are indeed needed to put into practice the holistic approaches for conservation of heritage, where we are not making separation between tangible and intangible, but really looking at holistic management and safeguarding of heritage. So let's start with our presentations, and I'm actually very honored to introduce our first keynote speakers. He's a very good friend, not only a friend, but also someone who has been a guide and a mentor in many ways, that I've always looked upon for his advice on not only on the field of heritage conservation, but also his advice in terms of what we should do for the future of the region. So it is indeed really an honor that he's with us. So let me give a brief introduction to Dr. Gamini Vijaysurya. He, as you all know, is a reputed heritage professional who has in fact gained a reputation as a lead international specialist in World Heritage with over 40 years of experience. And he has actually got recognition for his work on living cultural heritage. Today, we talk about living heritage without really thinking twice about what we are talking about. But when he started talking about it, nobody was, or very, very few people were, in fact, emphasizing the living dimension of heritage. And he was the one who was responsible for bringing this right on the international platform. His emphasis on people-centered approaches to the conservation of nature and culture that can secure benefits for the society have actually gained a standing worldwide. So without further ado, I'm inviting Dr. Gamini Vijaysurya to take the floor and make a presentation. Over to you.
Thank you. Give me a second till I. Something is, yeah. Give me a second. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rohit, for that wonderful words. But you may remember when ECROM started the Living Heritage Sites program, you were also there at the meeting. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear, very clear.
Can you see me also?
Yes,
My slide?
see
Okay.
you and your slides as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rohit, for that nice words. And of course, you are part of it. And also, a lot of things I talk here will be thanks to ECROM and my life at ECROM, which you are continuing. And thank you, Niyati. I'm glad that you have been able to do some work. And thank you for the invitation. And thank you, ICOMOS India, for the invitation. Okay, I have 20 minutes. I will be very quick, and I won't talk about intangible heritage because I think as Rohit said, I don't think I can see these divided between the tangible and intangible. But I'll go through, these are my points I'm going to talk about, what is happening today in the heritage sector, sort of context, and I will little bit talk about the evolution of heritage sector, and also to see whether there are strategies or tools developed over a period of time, and then I will check if there anything that we can share to be used as sort of for the sustainable management of cities. What is happening in the heritage sector today? Oh, it's a bit confusing. Divide and rule. The first thing we talk about tangible and intangible, and nature and culture divided. In the World Heritage sector, under the World Heritage Convention, it was intended to bring nature and culture together. But for 40 years, nature people were working on their own, culture people were working on their own until about 2013, where they have now started working together. Thanks to some of our pioneers like Tim Badman and Joseph King and so on. Okay, and tangible, intangible. You have two conventions. And, when intangible or young convention started developing its rules and regulations, they decided not to follow World Heritage. They didn't want anything. In fact, instead of operational guidelines, they call it operational something else, directives, OD, and they talk about safeguarding, whereas they talk about conservation. One good thing is that heritage is decided by people, and they don't talk about authenticity, and they talk about viability. The tangible people talk about continuity and so on. So, and of course, empire building, the hull, when something is developed, they try to be on top of the world. Hull just concluded some meeting yesterday, and they said, develop local heritage action 3, develop local heritage management actions based on Hull approach by joining the UNESCO and so on and so forth. The rich people will say this is the approach, and some will say, use the Venice Charter and so on. And then there is the East-West dialogue or debate, and there is some people will say Venice Charter is good, others say Nara is good. And values discussion, the West will not recognize. Of course, they will talk about values as something started by Regal, but they will be reluctant to acknowledge it or started with the Bara Charter in relation to conservation and management. And of course, some will think Western knowledge is superior, whereas you have completely forgotten the traditional knowledge system, things like what is in Agama. And heritage is being considered without people. I will show you some examples, and then even my topic shows that the role of intangible heritage in sustainability of historic town. How can
it be a town without life, without people, without intangible. So this is my problem, but I think it's something that I will highlight. You look at a comparison of the two conventions. One good thing is that in the intangible heritage convention, the communities define values, but they don't talk about values. They talk about domains, and World Heritage talk about values, and we consider when I say we, World Heritage considers values as central to everything and so on. But anyway, but things are evolving. When we wrote this article from sustaining heritage to heritage sustaining broader societal well-being and benefits as sort of econ perspective, we realized that in order to understand what is going on, in order to change our mindset, we need to think of the evolution of the cultural heritage theory and practice over the last half century. I will take you through very quickly, and I see a change. I start around 1964 or pre-64, and then my suggestion is that it has moved focus from fabric to people. This is something I like to highlight. And pre-64, we had the modern conservation discourse, and 64-74, it was continued, and 74 to 94, I see some changes happening, some sort of transition, and after 94, I consider as there is a people focus. Yeah, and in relation to this, we have developed knowledge and tool at every stage, and 74, 94 is something that the World Heritage System has started, and the values and values and discussion, significant discussion took place, but after 94, there are a lot of changes. Some of these I call tools that can be used for conservation of cities or tangible or intangible or anything that we want to talk about. This is how we started conservation. This is Angkor, where you had originally these temples where the Buddhist monks were living, and for the French who came, they didn't want to see them in front of this wonderful monument. They removed them, and that was the philosophy. And then they, at the same time, we totally, with the invent of the modern conservation philosophy, we completely ignored this traditional knowledge system, and that's why we had this meeting and forum by ECROM, and then collected all these things. Look at the definition of restoration and ancient ruins and so on, which I have highlighted. I have no time to talk about it. We have totally ignored them. And this is an invitation I had from Ayutthaya World Heritage Site, which is full of brick monuments, and I was asked to talk about conservation of brick monuments at the World Heritage Site, whereas it was a sacred place, a religious place, one of the most important pilgrimage places. Going back to our friends across the world, this is an example I use all the time. This Tombashawa cave temple complex, which has a sacred forest and rock art, and also intangible, if you want to call it, rainmaking rituals. And this was listed for rock art as a national heritage. And then, of course, from time to time, there is this ritual of rainmaking, where people make a fire and the smoke goes from to the air, and then they decide that they are going to have rain and so on and so forth. And then that ritual was part and parcel of the social interaction with these caves and the sacred space, and then their livelihood. And then, of course, they were stopped a couple of times doing that, and they thought these paintings are the culprits, and so they destroy the painting. This is how things were happening. And then, of course, this was recognized by the pioneers themselves. And this is what Roland Silla has said. We congratulate the authors of Venice Charter, but of course, it's not the end. And then in 93, Raymond Lamy himself confessed that the Congress participants, when they were writing the Venice Charter, did not realize the complexity of international preservation. To the trip, another expert who was on the meeting said that today I can confess there was much that we simply did not know. And also there's a rush for writing charters still, and Raymond Lamy himself said charters are fashionable, however, they never contain more than the minimum of which the majority has agreed. And of course, this is Andrea Samachowski was also director of ECROM, and the chair of the theory and philosophy committee says, as a rule, they contain empty desiderata presented for acceptance and use and not theoretical reflection. So this is a situation. And if I show you this situation, how before the 94, how we looked at monuments and sites, looked at physical fabric, and looked at impacts, and then decided on interventions. And of course, we took care of the well-being of materials. Nothing wrong, but that's how it happened. Conservation, expert-driven process, and we got all principles we do have. And then, of course, what happened after 94 is sort of developing a series of tools, starting with NARA document on authenticity. Of course, it did not talk about authenticity much. They talk about values, context, and so on, which are more people-focused themes. And diversity and so on. These are some of the things that former President ICOMOS Gustavo Arro said, challenged the Eurocentric doctrinal foundation and shattered that and so on. And then, of course, started the cultural landscape idea, which brings in people, environment, and interaction, which also brought livelihood of people and also people focus. And then the Living Heritage Sites program, which ECROM started in 2000 to 2003. In fact, my colleague, I met Rohit for the first time in Bangkok, the first meeting, which later developed into the people-centered approaches to conservation. And of course, living heritage, we started at that time. And after the intangible heritage people started their work, they also picked up the theme living heritage, is what they are using now. And also we brought the concepts of continuity. Rohit himself brought it, I brought it in a different context and so on. So this is, we are looking at continuity as a sort of key theme, not to freeze things in the space and time. Some people considered it as a non-Western paradigm. This is a slide from Giovanni Boccardi, who think there is this idea of community and continuity, which has changed certain things. And in fact, this is what we wrote in 2003, the living heritage approach implies a focus on people, both past and present, their cultural products and practices, both tangible and intangible, so their values and relationships are considered and maintained through process of sustainable development, management, and regeneration of heritage sites. Mind you, this is 2003, and my message in this lecture is also this: we should stop all the divisions. And then other tools that came up, the historic urban landscape. I'm not going to go into details, but it's cities were considered as monuments, but now they have brought in human dimensions and social dimensions and people focus, and also intangible. So these are some of the tools that you can use. And then when we wrote, when ECROM wrote the Managing Cultural World Heritage together with other advisory bodies, we started talking about capturing all values, not just outstanding values, and also thinking of benefits to heritage as well as people. When we started 2013-14, the link in nature and culture again, we brought in the people aspect. And World Heritage Committee itself brought the communities in 2007, and there were many other things happened afterwards. And with that, people started talking about holders of rights, holders of knowledge, and again, cases related to people. And it's interesting, in parallel, nature sector also has talked about and moving forward towards people and from nature itself to people and nature. So culture people started talking about people, nature people started talking, nature sector started talking about people, and then nature culture together started talking about people. You remember, as Rohit, very famous General Assembly, you made history there by inviting nature people into the meeting. And of course, that is where Tim Badman said nature conservation is about people. And we introduced the people-centered approach and the need to place people at the heart of the discourse. Thank you, Rohit, for doing that. And now, if you look at the same diagram, we look at in a different way. We talk about heritage and people as integral part and having two overarching concepts guiding diversity and context and looking at values, all held by people. It's people's heritage, whether it is tangible or intangible, and looking at heritage, the impact on heritage and impact of heritage, like Rohit already mentioned, and results aim at people and heritage and also the wider world. So we now look at well-being of society and also the materials or the heritage. And we are thinking of managing continuity and change, as Rohit very well said, and it has to be a society-driven process. And then, of course, things are still evolving. And this is what ECROM developed, this promotion of people-centered approaches. Started for the culture sector, but then nature sector was very impressed. And then now it's running for promoting people-centered approaches for culture and nature. The key thing is that placing people at the heart of the discourse. And of course, when you are thinking of people, placing people at the heart, there are other things that you need to consider. I'm not going to go into details, but these divisions between nature and culture and this, that have to be stopped. And then, of course, these approaches to conservation and management, moving from conventional to values to people-centered, we consider as a sort of paradigm shift of moving from looking at only heritage or tangible to societies, well-being of society as well as museum, as well as heritage. So let's look at whether there are tools that can be used. I think you can use all those tools I mentioned. I didn't go into details, but I saw there is something common to tangible world and intangible world. Perhaps this is something that we need to think about utilizing for this very subject that you are talking about. And there is the UNESCO World Heritage, the Sustainable Development Policy. At the same time, of course, UN has the UN SDGs, but it's interesting that intangible heritage people are also talking about the sustainable development. So, okay, let's see whether we can get both into look at as a sort of major tool to go into urban, I wouldn't say urban, but for any heritage sector. Overarching principles are common to both human rights, equality, sustainability, long-term perspectives. And of course, this was developed for world heritage, but it's for heritage in general. You know the pillars of that, and you can start thinking of how heritage, how in time, whether it is tangible or intangible, contribute to fostering peace and security, social development, inclusive economic development, and environmental sustainability. It's no matter whether it is tangible or intangible, urban or rural, monuments or palaces or whatever, these things can be very important tools to useful. In fact, this is a slide from our friend Giovanni Boccardi. Let's try to look at all these, how heritage can contribute to this 4 pillars of sustainability while doing more sustainable, sensitive conservation and management. So in conclusion, I would say, as the organizers had thought, a holistic approach, top, divide and rule. Heritage that we are talking about, no divisions. Consider broader participation, consider all values. Peace, place people at the heart of the discourse. These are intangible dimensions, their values and everything. Use knowledge and tools as appropriate and applicable, the one I discussed, contextualize. And of course, you have to develop new knowledge. Just don't wait for the heaven to bring all these things. Let's try to work together in meetings like this. This is a good opportunity, and thank you for our friends in India for organizing these things. And new knowledge and new tools necessary need to be developed. And of course, think of benefits to the heritage and society, both, and conservation as managing continuity and change, like Rohit said. And of course, sustainable development paradigm could be a medium or central tool to bring together all. So answering to Rohit, he wanted me to tell one tool, if there is anything. It is something that you are in, you are active, the people-centered approach to conservation that ECOM is promoting. If you want to use one, is something, I'm prejudiced, but this is something I would recommend. So thank you, ECOM, thank you Inyati and team, thank you ICOM of India. That's all. I don't know how long I took.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Gaminiji, for this very interesting presentation. I think you really laid a larger perspective on and traced the historical evolution of this whole changing understanding of heritage and the tools and methodologies that are being developed in line with this changing thought process. So that has been a very interesting and useful, thought-provoking presentation for us. So thank you again. We will have this dialogue further in the discussion after all the presentations. So now I would request our next speaker, Dr. Purnima Chauhan, to make her presentation. Dr. Chauhan is an IAS officer from Himachal cadre. She has held departments of tourism, culture, urban development, and town and country planning, and has masters in development administration from Manchester, UK, and PhD in the problem of tourism growth management in the Himalayas, taking the case of Manali in Kulu Valley. So, Dr. Purnima, over to you, and we are very eagerly waiting to listen to you. Please.
Thank you so much, Rohit. And it has been excellent hearing Dr. Gemini, because I thought that, the whole discourse was about from theory to practice. And I suspected all along that I had done the reverse as Secretary Culture. And I'm very glad that I wasn't very wrong in my focus. So I'll just share what we did under a scheme called Aaj Purani Rahon Se. So how we dovetailed all these aspects. And as you can see, the beautiful jewelry that these girls are wearing, as was said, the intergenerational and cultural layering of intangible cultural heritage is fundamentally heterogeneous. And that lends a lot of diversity, a lot of interest to it. And that was what I was targeting when I started this.
Dr. Chauhan, sorry, we can't see your PPT.
You have to share the screen.
Oh, just a minute, I did.
Yeah, maybe there is some problem at that side.
Oh, just a minute, let me just.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Now, can you see it?
Yes, now it's very clear.
Yeah.
So you can go to the slide mode, presentation mode. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll just start from the first one, and here goes. Sorry about that. So as you can see, that these girls and their jewelry is probably very, very evocative and attractive to any woman. And now we come to the aspects that Dr. Gemini has covered so well. I will not go into details. The very fact that cultural heritage by the fact that it is so diverse at every 5 kilometers in Himachal Pradesh, the dialects change. And language being the janani or the mother of lifestyles, the heterogeneous nature which it lends, automatically I felt as Secretary Culture and having had the background of tourism and urbanization, I felt that this is something with which we can reinvent our approach to tourism. So the oral traditions, expressions, language, all the values that we place on performing arts, social practices, rituals and festivals, knowledge about nature and universe, these existed. But the very important aspect that Dr. Jamni just covered was what is the value placed on it. And when you say people centered, the tragedy is that people themselves did not value it, did not see anything coming out of it. And that is what I had to reverse, because my own innate understanding was that culture has such an interesting dimension to it. It can be used to repackage tourism, to reinvent it. And of course, I will not go into the cultural convention that has been done very well. And of course, Agenda 21 triple bottom line says environment, economic, and social sustainability. But I firmly believe culture is the fourth pillar of sustainable development, which is borne out by SDG 11.4, and the SDGs 8 and 12 talk of sustainable mountain specific tourism, which is very, very important because even Niti Aayog has brought it out on the Indian Himalayan region. They have specially talked about it. And the UNWTO's guidebook includes cultural heritage in 13 of its sustainable development indicators. Very important thing, apart from the historic urban landscape approach, which is holistic, is that culture and creative industries are the fastest growing in the world, representing 30 million jobs worldwide. And today growing even faster, which ironically is thanks to COVID. I'll come to that. So when we're talking of the tripod on which my presentation is based is culture on the one hand, tourism on the other, and urbanization. The world is more than 50% urbanized since 2010 and growing. India is 32% urbanized, adds 63% to GDP, and projected to become 74% by the turn of this decade. Himachal Pradesh is actually 10% urbanized, which is one of the least urbanized. And the only reason for that, which I could pinpoint, is that in our rural areas also, we have roti, kapda, makan, and bijli, pani, sadak, and IT. What more do you need? So it is only for health and jobs and education that people move to cities. But even that is not so bad here. Now, on the other hand, India is sitting on a gold pot, of 400,000 sites, which are closely linked to the intangibles which surround them like an aura. At the same time, the travel and tourism industry globally generates 3.6% of the GDP directly, global GDP, and 10.3%, employing a huge number of 77 million people, which is 3% of the total employment, which is 1 in every 12 jobs. And the indirect multiplier impact of that is 150%. So, but it is a very fragile product, as we have seen, whether it's a tsunami, whether it's COVID, whether it is conflict. It is the first beating that is given is to tourism. Indian tourism accounts for 21% of the total employment in the service sector. Can we ignore it then? And our own Himalayan region is growing at a rate of 8%, and is likely to grow even more thanks to work from home and work from the mountains, which is being prompted by COVID. Now, having said that, Himachal, when we look at the statistics over here, the number of tourists is 3 times the number of host population. So we have to capitalize that without causing congestion. So those are the sustainable development concerns on one hand. Mountain people in any case, because mountains are 2.5 times climatically more vulnerable, they are the ecological resource providers. So we as a people are very conscious of conservation. So smart convergence of all these three, legs of the triad would lead to something which I call immersive tourism. And for that, we had to reinvent, repackage, rebrand destinations by adding the cultural, intangible aspects. So what did we do? Now, what I saw while researching for this webinar is that fortunately, there are the major stakeholders, these 3 stakeholders have come up with schemes very recently, which actually talk of converging and reaping the harvest of the synergy from these 3 sectors. But I can't understand one thing, and probably the experts over here will be able to tell me, where have MOUDs, TCPOs, 2011 heritage guidelines gone? They were fantastic. And I remember as Director of Urban Development, I prompted the government to adopt them with very, very few contextual changes. Now, Niti Aayog recently has formulated a single overarching vision for heritage development, using center and state competitive and cooperative federalism. National Urban Planning Framework, on the other hand, has done a bottoms-up city comprehensive urban development plan and a state integrated urban development plans. And Ministry of Housing is emphasizing data smart cities because of the 100 smart cities. And these are supposed to be inclusive, not just taking everybody along, but also including convergence of schemes which are vital, like Amrut, Swachh Bharat, then the Hriday Toolkit, Digital India, skill development, housing for all, and very important, construction of museums funded by the culture department and other programs connected to social infrastructure, which are health, education, and culture. And one can't emphasize health more than what is being emphasized now during COVID. The whole focus is what the Prime Minister says, Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-dependent Bharat, and achieving US dollar 5 trillion economy by 2025, which the date may be pushed further now. The mountain city challenge, as I said, because mountains per se have lack of land, a lot of heritage, but it is not, value is not placed on it. So now, what are the smart cities doing? We have two smart, I'll forget about what the other cities are doing. Let's focus on Shimla and Dharamshala, which are the two smart cities in Himachal. Now, this is Himachal for you. And here, suffice to say that in 2012, when I was making a presentation to UNESCO for recognizing just two sites in Shimla, one where the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies is, and then the heart of Shimla, many of you may have seen it, and that is the plaza where you have the Christ Church and you have the Gaiety Theatre, and it is a melting pot of heritage. I was just asking that these two should be recognized tentatively for World Heritage status. And the UNESCO representative turns around and tells me, why are you being so conservative? Why don't you ask for the entire Mall Road of Shimla? And that entire Mall Road of Shimla actually comprises of 7 hills. So if Rome is in Rome, and just as Rome was not built a day and is on 7 hills, well, similarly, Shimla is on 7 hills, which is Elysium, Jaco Hill, Bantony Hill, Inveram Hill, Observatory, Prospect, and Summer Hill. Encrypting this for getting World Heritage status is a huge task. At the same time, the history of Himachal Pradesh goes back right to Mahabharat and can be broadly divided into 6 parts: Odambras, Trigat, Kuluta, Kulindas, Gupta Empire, Harsha. Out of these, I use Trigat for the Apursa scheme translating into a circuit and into something to promote that particular district of Kangra and linking it beyond the state barriers with Jalandhar. What did Apursa scheme, Aaj Purani Rahon Se, the short form is Apursa, what did it focus on? It focused on identifying lesser known places, whether personalities, stories, folklore, food, culture, dance, everything. And this oral tradition, it led the DCs to identify, they were told how to do it. There was a format given to them. 1,147 sites were identified. And Shikha will validate that. Just recently, I have given 193 sites, which were perhaps to be taken up with the NITI Aayog. Now, in addition to those sites, how to have them capturing the eyeballs when people are traveling within Himachal Pradesh. And they don't have anybody to tell them. So we had Apursa signages, one done very artistically, which you will see on the Apursa map further on. And it was like a Aaj Purani Rahon Se, it was a sepia colored road with a Himachali roof on it and with little cutouts of houses and trees on the sides. So these signages also had QR coding on them to enable a person to travel, explore on his own. And you know, it's almost like crystal ball gazing that now 2 years beyond 2018, 3 years, it's almost as if it was designed to allow people to explore Himachal during COVID time, when people don't want to be in crowded places. The Apursa also had another livelihood dimension, that was cultural guides, not tourist guides. So we thought of retraining tourist guides and registering them by giving them inputs on culture basically, and then on how to exhibit that. So that led to a lot of understanding of how people do not even value what they have. They only look at packages from outside. And dispersal to decongest tourist destination. Now in Himachal, those 2 crore tourists who come here, they are crowding destinations like Shimla, Manali, Dalhousie, and Dharamshala, these 4. Whereas there's so much to be explored over here. You can imagine 1,147 sites is not a small deal. And then the idea was that once we have this all sorted, then we will have rebranding and re-imaging of Himachal tourism. So the first linkage was with tourism. and intersectoral linkages with, horticulture, tea gardens, and our 91 fairs and festivals dotting the landscape from international to local. In addition, when a person goes to these lesser known areas, he wants to carry back a memory. So there was a huge program we started for having local souvenirs miniaturized, because whatever artifacts that we had were beautiful but very huge, unaffordable, and cannot be carried in a 15-kilo flight. So with all these things in mind, these are the 7 hills. So I'll just skip through this because that will take time. When you're going to the Kalha Shimla Heritage Railway Line, this is not an ordinary line, dates back to 1903 and is recognized in 2008 as a UNESCO World Heritage narrow toy train. It goes through 103 tunnels. And what is very important is this man called Baba Bhalku, because the tunnel which is in between, that is Badok tunnel, which is the longest. So there are stories populating the heritage and the intangibles here, that this particular long tunnel was entrusted to one engineer, a British engineer, Badok. And the poor man, he tried to construct it from both ends, but the both ends did not meet. When he was unsuccessful, he was penalized by the British by imposing a penalty of 1 rupee on him. But the shame of not being able to do his job led him to commit suicide. And after that, the British were at a loss that, this showpiece that they had, how do they complete it? That is the time this man who was locally revered, Baba Bhalku, he appeared and he was guided by a local deity, it is believed, to trace the right path in the mountains. He actually did help, like his divining stick. He helped them how to do the tunnels, how to do the gradient, etc. And it is said that he was such a compassionate man that because of his belief in, all beings, living beings, he would not even remove the lice from his hair, and he would pour sugar and flour over his matted hair so that he could feed them also. And that is why his family would not tolerate him in the house. So these are the kind of small stories that add so much value to a place. And that is why, Badok station is an important stop. I don't know how many people would have actually experienced that. But if you haven't, you can do the journey again. Dakshai jail, that is also en route on this railway track. That is, hardly anybody knows about this 1849 vintage cellular jail, which is one of the rare ones in India. Everybody knows about Andaman cellular jail. But Dakshai jail is where even Gandhiji stayed a night in 1920. And mind you, this is before Gandhiji's 10 trips to Shimla during the freedom struggle from 1921 to 1946. And where we made an Apursa circuit with 11 points in Shimla. But this point was the one which escaped us, that he stopped in Dakshai's cellular jail because he came to meet Salvador Dali, who was an Irish Republican Army person. And because of the mutiny in Jalandhar, these Irishmen were imprisoned by the British here. And Dali was to be hanged. The others got a reprieve, but not Dali. So Gandhiji came to meet him before that. And he stayed one night in this jail. So, just a minute. And this is what Himachal generally looks like. Himachal is rural and urban. And the kind of apples that you see here, it is known as the apple state of India. These apple blossom the natural beauty of Himachal. This apple was brought also has a story. In 1916, it was brought to one of the major apple areas of Kotgarh, beyond Shimla, by Satyanand Stokes. He's called an American in Khadi. And this is how apple economy also, and apple tourism is also something which we have targeted. So tourist arrivals, as I said, is huge. It's 3 times the local population. 67% arrivals only concentrated in just 4 places. And the luxury tax contribution cannot be gainsaid. 13.3 crores. Employment is huge. 8% of the state GDP depends upon it. Now, we have 3,000 hotels with a bed capacity of almost 82,000. And there are homestays dotting the state, and which have another about 7 to 8,000. So they are the ones which lend a heterogeneity over homogeneity. And now people are looking more and more not at hotels, homogeneous hotels, but at homestays. So mass versus class tourism, these are the issues. Current baseline ecotourist data or arrival data is not structured properly. There is a traffic congestion when you have these 4 places only being targeted. But there is no integrated policy to harvest this opportunity, which is literally staring you in the face. So we have tried in Apursa scheme to have creative use of incentives, disincentives, trying some sort of benchmarking. I won't say it is complete, it is just a work in progress. And we have consumptive and non-consumptive tangibles and intangibles of culture to create something called immersive tourism. It may be a niche tourism, but it is growing so rapidly now that I felt I was looking into the crystal ball in January 2018 while framing a POSA scheme. So when we consolidate,
Dr. Purnima, if you can wrap up in 2 minutes, because we are
we'll need more than 2 minutes.
just try to please wrap up as soon
Okay.
as you can, please. Thank
So
you.
we have this epic trail. So these are the trails that we consolidated. That how do we manage this? One is the epic trail of Ramayana Mahabharata, the British Raj trail, which is prevalent, the Buddhist trail, Pahadi trail, tribal trail, and of course the art trail. Master Madan, a prodigy of music who died in 1942 at the age of 15. You have the caravan trail, the trade routes, and you have the sacred geography of the hillsides and the forest. So these are some of the pictures. This is the floating islands in the lake which have an element of divinity, but there's a science behind it. This is Master Madan, who was a child prodigy in music. You had Ustad Vilayat Khan. K.L. Sehgal also was a salesman at Remington Typewriters on the Mall. And then, of course, Amrita Shergill's connection. And if you connect the dots, the whole idea is culture can connect the dots to reinvent a place, to tell a story artfully. And you had, at one point of time, the understanding of how culture can be leveraged was so low that this Peliti, which is an Italian family, sent 200 pictures to us from the Ministry of Culture of life spent in Shimla in the mid 19th century. And these pictures were returned by the municipal corporation, little realizing they said we have no space on our walls. Now that needs to change. So these are the petroglyphs in the tentatively listed World Heritage also includes the cold deserts of Himachal Pradesh. And these are the rock art of Spiti. And just now, Dr. Javani also talked about rock art. So this is the petroglyphs of 3,500 years old near Tabo Monastery, which is one of the oldest. And then language, what we did with languages is that we traced its history, put it into a coffee table book, and how the Western Pahari language is connected to Aryan languages and Sanskrit. And this first copy of this little coffee table book was given to the president, now is a souvenir. And these languages, 7 vanishing scripts were included in this. And then how these scripts were deciphered vis-a-vis Devanagari. And this book launch was done at Vishwa Hindu Sammelan in Mauritius and then in Doha. And then we also discovered that Sanskrit, which was notified as our state is the second state in India to have notified Sanskrit as an official language. But it was already being spoken in 4 areas very remotely. And even today, the generations are using it in these 4 areas of Himachal. So in the Shimla International Lit Fest, we had a Sanskrit session and we created this Lit Fest completely to give a Pahari flavor to it, not like any of the other clone of any other Lit Fest in India. Now, this is the Sancha, which actually generated livelihood for a man years ago. And regular.
Dr. Purnima, I'm so sorry, but the other speakers have to also.
I'm winding up.
Thank you so much. Yes, so, thank you.
Just a minute. I'm just showing the maps that we have done and the souvenirs that we have created. And perhaps we can take up the rest of the issues when we have them. This is the map that we had done of the personalities. And so we have tried to include all the heritage to give immersive tourism a chance and create more economic opportunities and reinvent Shimla. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Purnima. I'm so sorry, just to make sure that everybody has time to speak. So that was very interesting. And now, without further time, I will quickly request Dr. Shikha Jain to kindly make her presentation. Just very quick background to Dr. Shikha Jain. Dr. Jain has an extensive portfolio on cultural heritage that covers conservation, world heritage, and museum planning in India and overseas. As an international expert, she has advised government organizations and UNESCO offices in Singapore, Malaysia, UAE, Myanmar, and Indonesia. She has been consultant to UNESCO New Delhi and has represented Ministry of Culture, India, on the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. She also steered the nomination for Jaipur as UNESCO Creative City of Crafts and Folk Art in 2015. So over to you, Shikha. Maybe you can unmute yourself, Shikha.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you very well, Shikha. Please go ahead.
So thank you, Rohit, for that introduction, and thanks to NSC ICH and the EPWG ICOMOS India for inviting me here today in this important session. My presentation covers two particular cities that I have been associated with, and with reference to already what Dr. Gamini Vijaysurya has shown in terms of the tools and strategies. I'm just going to present some of the tools and strategies that we tried in our association with these cities. So my presentation actually is structured in three sections. In the first one, I'm just trying to show that do we really understand the nature of intangible cultural heritage in historic Indian cities? And there were two particular experiences that made me realize how in-depth this particular attribute is, and which actually, impacted the tools and strategies that we started devising to look at this particular aspect. And then finally, with whatever knowledge of UNESCO tools, which Dr. Gamini has also presented some of them, I'm going to address that whether we can use these tools and how do we use these tools, or how can they be helpful in some way to address the ICH in historic Indian cities. So starting with, these are two cities, Udaipur and Jaipur. With both the cities I've been associated with more than 20 years. And I think I'm still learning about the ICH because there's just so much out there. So I'll start with Udaipur, which is, one of my favorite cities. It's spread around the 13th century Lake Pichola, which was expanded in the 16th century when the city was established. And you can see the palace and how the city has come around it. Fortunately, it still retains most of its historic character, and you can see the natural setting also with the Aravali's in the surrounding. But you can also see that the lake, it's actually a network of 7 lakes, with the Lake Pichola as the most historic, and how important it is and critical to the city's existence. It has very rich cultural heritage, and one of the first Indian heritage hotel that was started almost pre-independence actually by the royal family. But you can see this actually served as a great economy booster, and it's become a heritage tourism destination. There are multiple hotels, but despite that, fortunately, the city has retained its character, and largely because of its people and their conservative approach to retain the heritage associations as well as their intangible values. But the paradox here is, when there is no water, then the city, where 40% of economy depends on tourism, actually has not much of sustenance. And you can see here the Lake Palace Hotel, when the lake is dried, they start thinking of doing camel rides on the lake bed, just to entertain their guests. But it really suffers during these times. And this is a view from 2006 when the lake last dried up. Now, this, of course, is the tourism and economy impact. In some ways, locals associate with it. But it is interesting to see how it is understood or how it impacts the local values. And this is, a scene I came across when I was still working in Udaipur. It's years back, and I saw this lake again 2006 when the lake bed is completely dried up, and I saw these community ladies, women gathering around and in the lake bed, and I was quite surprised, and I asked one of the locals that what is this happening, and he said that, oh, this keeps happening 3-4 times a day, or sometimes more also, depending on the situation. This is when there's somebody in the family dies, then the women get together and they have to take after the cremation, they come and take bath in the lake. And it's really surprising that all these women, they have houses, they have tap water coming, they have toilets in their houses, but this whole ritual and the lake as a space where they need to have this community ritual is so significant. They actually order a water tanker, a municipal water tanker, and to complete this ritual. So this made me realize that these are certain aspects of intangible associations that we need to integrate maybe in planning in long term. And another story from the other case study in Jaipur is about this Badi Chopper, which is the main public square. This is an 18th century planned city. And you can see this archival image which shows the vendors and informal spaces that were used along with the built heritage, which was it was always known since its conception as a very innovative town planning, even during the British period and later post-independence. So just to inform you about the background of this particular image was actually brought in by one of the vendors who's located here. This was in 2010, and he started saying, see, we used to have these permanent shops out here, and if you can build us shops. So he took this to the government, and I was asked to look at it, and they said that, can we build shops for them out here? And I said, no, these you can see that these are temporary structures, and that's what we can design for them. And that's how we started interacting with this community here. And all these shopkeepers, which were Phoolwalas and Churiwalas, and we interviewed them, and we started designing these kind of vendor stations for them, where they could sell the product but also lock it and go back. And then what happened is there was a proposal for metro, and there was also like these shopkeepers behind who had the permanent shops. They complained to the mayor saying that if this kind of structure, temporary structure comes up, then their shops will be blocked. And because of that, the mayor decided to remove all these vendors from here. So it was quite a shock for us that, these were nicely designed vendor spaces, but they were just asked to remove themselves. And then this metro work started in 2014. And these workers, just like the vendors, asked us if we can share the design with them, because they were relocated in another space. And we said, fine, we shared all these designs, and they were given fund from the government. So they were relocated in another space. But for some reason, we felt that this is the space, and the city is really incomplete. The experience is incomplete without this informal vendor space, which is what enriches the built heritage at the same time. And I was very hopeful that they are going to come back. And this is post when the metro station is, completed here. It's functioning now. And you can see in 2020, you have these Phoolwalas back here. And this lady who actually offered me rose, I was paying her money, and she said, no, I don't need it. So it's just these kind of intangible associations that also made one realize that, the intangible practices in the city are actually more lasting and more permanent than any of the tangible heritage that we see, or we feel that, it's monumental and needs to be there. And these are the experiences that made us realize on how important it is to engage with the people and really understand the local values or heritage while addressing these. So I'll just quickly show how we started with the city of Udaipur. I've already mentioned the 16th century city and its planning, so I won't get into this detail. But since we were working with the royal family, who's also, a patron of heritage, and they have the City Palace Museum, they came up with an MOU with the municipal corporation and the UNESCO New Delhi office to look at the living heritage of Udaipur, and also look at heritage-based planning for the city. And since the royal family itself, continues to sustain age-old traditions, and they call their palace museum as a living heritage museum, since a lot of rituals are carried on, like this Ashwa Pujan ceremony here, or how this main ground in the palace continues to be used since 16th century for these events and rituals. So even in the conservation works that one did for them, the conservation policy looked at not only conserving the built heritage, like you see the chhatri on the left side, and this is Nagar Khana ki chhatri, where the Nagara was beaten, but we interviewed the Nagarchi, and the Nagara was restored and he was reinstated. So even now, as part of the museum experience, you have this Nagarchi and the Nagaras going on 4 times during the day, or even during the conservation process, just the process of laying the kalash on top of the chhatri, which is so significant. So it was not just the built heritage processes or use of traditional materials and techniques, but also the rituals associated with it, which were part of the conservation process. And coming to the city level and their MOU with the UNESCO on looking at a heritage-based development, it was after analyzing their city plan, it was realized that there is no provision or direct access for the rural artists or craftsmen. And there are many traditional, craftspeople who are migrating from Udaipur. And one of the important aspects in this was in our team, it was interdisciplinary, and we had an anthropologist. And she suggested, looking at the Udaipur plan, which you see on the right side, she suggested that what you see as red dots are the tourism spots. And what you see as green are actually the urban villages, which are actually crafts villages. So she said, if we map these together and we actually make these tourism trails through the villages, through these urban villages where craftspeople are actually working, we can actually provide better access to the tourists and also a more authentic experience. So this was one of the interventions at the planning level that was suggested, which was quite well accepted. And even with the palace moving on to the, inviting the craftspeople to showcase their work in the palace events, or the heritage walks that were developed, experiencing Haveli's people, lifestyle, chalks, temples, wells, and rituals. So it was just not the built heritage space, but also the rituals and the promotion of local arts and crafts, and sharing stories of the local community, which is so important. So the palace also started, the foundation, Maharana Mewar Charitable Foundation, have started this World Living Heritage Festival since 2012. And every 2 years they host this festival where they invite ideas on living heritage. There are workshops with architecture colleges and others, and experts are invited, but also spaces are given to craftspeople to showcase their work. And throughout the city there are spaces where events happen during this festival. And interestingly, we have this person that you see in the yellow kurta is actually a local guide. And he actually saw our presentation on living heritage in one of the palace conferences, and he just started his own living heritage walk in the city of Udaipur. So it was quite interesting for us to see how the locals are picking this. And next year we came and he already had a walk with this particular aspect where you are specifically looking at the associations and living heritage value. And fortunately, even today we finished the Udaipur Architectural Guide, which is a living heritage guide again, because each walk is talking not just about the built heritage, but also the experience. And whatever publications are being done there address this aspect of the tangible and intangible as living heritage. So these were some initial efforts that we made, looking at heritage walks and planning interventions, what I mentioned, for integrating ICH in historic city management. And similar experiments were also carried out in the city of Jaipur, but there it is further reinforced with some UNESCO recognitions that have come through time. And as I said, this is again a city where we have been working for years, starting with the heritage management plan, when we realized that 30% of the walled city economy actually is in the small scale industries and the crafts, of the city there. But working further, because there is a very specific focus on built heritage, they have been conserving their bazaars and monuments since, years. At the same time, there was a parallel focus to look at the intangible heritage of the crafts. And this is something that was consciously pushed, and especially coming up with the UNESCO Creative City nomination, which actually was, even though Jaipur at that time was on tentative list and the government was keen to push the World Heritage nomination also forward. But it is good that they listened to the experts and they agreed that maybe we should go for the Creative City designation before we move in for the World Heritage. And of course, by 2019, it had both, including the criteria 6, for World Heritage, recognizing the crafts there. But the Jaipur story, I mean, there were several projects similar to Udaipur also. This is, one of the projects initially taken in the suburban area of Jaipur, where you have 52 historic structures protected. But the whole process of using traditional techniques and materials is what generated employment for the traditional craftspeople, the lime workers, the stone workers. And today, Jaipur and Rajasthan is one of the key resources all across India for this kind of craftsmanship. So this is something that the government promoted. They were the first ones to come up with this schedule of rates and take up this kind of initiative. And these are just images showing that even after it is conserved, finally it has to get back to life. And so heritage walks, of course, are one way of starting that. Even within the city, looking at various spaces within the walks and actually carrying out social surveys to understand what exactly do the people want, in terms of designing. We looked at, which person is allowing access within the house, or which person wants it more like a museum, or some of them wanted to offer sharbat to the people who are in the walk area. So this was a participatory walk design, including students of architecture. This is Oxford Brookes University urban planning students who were staying there and who designed this particular area, and then showcasing it to the residents there, asking them what they need. And in fact, this is in one square of the city, but there were people from other squares who came and they asked, why can't we do it in our square? Can we participate in this kind of designing? So, and moving from there, it was also in 2015 that we proposed Jaipur as the crafts and folk art for under UNESCO Creative Cities. And also because Jaipur's history is very much, its inception of our city is ingrained in its, as a trade and commerce city. So the crafts has been very much critical to its planning right from the beginning. So it's not just the town planning and the urban architecture, but also the crafts. Which was called the 36 Karkhanas, or the 36 industries, when Savai Jai Singh designed it in 1727. So these are some of the crafts that were mapped, which still exist. And finally, amongst the crafts, we had to see, as per UNESCO Creative City nomination, that which crafts are still continuing, and or which are, even if they are at risk, then which crafts can the government support or the locals are associated with, so we can further promote. So even folk arts like Galibazi, which is actually a small gathering of people in areas where they can just have this Galibazi session, which is traditional, is something that is being carried out, and there are local NGOs that are actually encouraging all these folk arts.
Shikha, if you can wrap up, that would be great in 2 minutes. Yes.
Okay, this is the last one. So this is what, I mean, in the World Heritage nomination also, we emphasized on criteria 6. There are projects linked to how, buildings can be used by craftspeople, how walks can integrate, crafts, how architecture colleges and young people can be engaged in the city designing, including crafts and local people. So these are some views of that, and of course the inscription. But finally, it is looking at basically UNESCO Creative City as a tool for integrating the sustainable development goals in planning, because they are not only the crafts being promoted, but also the areas for the craftspeople. And these are again similar events, the walks going digital. And finally, we've launched a website, which is, you can see the logo also. It includes the planning, the 3 criteria, including the Jali, which implies the craftsmanship. I'm just going to show this video, Rohit, and then that's the last one. So this is about, the website that is being designed with several local NGOs in Jaipur, and also 2 architecture colleges. The music that you hear is actually a metal harp that you see here, very traditional to Rajasthan. And I will just move forward, but this is, not only tangible, but also looking at all the intangible. And the idea is that the site will give access to local craftspeople to actually sell their stuff they've been suffering from COVID and, suffering from the lockdown during COVID, and the economy is suffering. So the website is supposed to be a resource for that. And my last slide on the tools, I think the historic urban landscape tools have been mentioned earlier. The planning tools and the regulatory tools I've already shown in my case studies how we use those. And I think the other tools I'll talk about when we have the panel discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shikha. That was very interesting. To just look at some practical examples of how this kind of a holistic approach can be put into practice at different levels. I think we got a lot of very interesting insights from your presentation. Now, I would request our next speaker, Dr. Jigna Desai. She will be presenting a case study. Just a brief introduction to Dr. Desai, who is a member of the International Scientific Committee for Historic Towns and Villages. Jigna has been practicing since 1999 and is engaged with academics since 2002. In fact, she joined CEPT University as a faculty member in full-time capacity in 2009, and she brings to the institute her experience in working with traditional environments and framing how they may be understood, studied, and transformed. So there's a lot of interesting insights that I'm sure Jigna will bring. So over to you, Jigna.
Thank you very much, Rohit, for that very elaborate introduction. I'll try to share the right screen this time. Okay, can you see my screen? And I will.
Yes, Jigna, this is very, very clear.
Okay, so before I start on, I want to kind of share with you that what the experience, what I'm going to share today is some of our experiences while doing certain projects and conducting certain research in the historic city of Ahmedabad. And the reason why I've focused just on Ahmedabad while our experience is wider is because it kind of connects with all these different aspects quite well. And I also want to say at this point of time that the work that I'm showing just now is kind of a mixed learning from my personal research, from the academic engagement that we've had with our students, some of whom are here today at CEPT University at Faculty of Architecture, and the work that we do at Center for Heritage Conservation, CEPT Research and Development Foundation. So I will start with echoing the sentiments that Dr. Vijay Surya started with, that all heritage of humanity has its intangible dimensions, whether work of art, historic building, historic town, or cultural landscape. And I'm quoting Dr. Yokileto over here. As this argument suggests, intangible heritage is the knowledge, wisdom, beliefs, practices that are instrumental in making the tangible heritage. While the tangible heritage presents itself in form of material culture, it is finite. The intangible heritage is transmitted from generation to generation and is constantly recreated by communities and groups in response to their environment, their interaction with nature, and their history. And I'm once again quoting Dr. Yokileto from, paraphrasing Dr. Yokileto from his ICOMOS narratives in between 2002 and 2006. This particular relationship was extremely visible for us when we were studying how community cultural organizations responded at the time of COVID. Ahmedabad Old City was the historic city was quite very badly affected. It went through multiple lockdowns through the past 1.5 years. And we could see that a lot of these traditions or a lot of issues that are related with life, livelihood, education, poverty, health, spiritual well-being were addressed by a lot of these cultural organizations. And I saw in the comment section that Professor Rodwell asked a question, can culture be something that is recognized in all SDGs? And a study of what these cultural organizations did during the time of COVID may give us an answer to that. What I will be doing is I will be giving 3 examples from the historic city of Ahmedabad. I'm not going to describe the city. I think a lot of that is available on the UNESCO website, but my minutes will just go in that. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to take up 3 cases. The one is of the making of a traditional house of Ahmedabad. The second is one of the narratives of marginalized heritage. And third is of the gendered access. And how behind all these 3 otherwise tangible narratives, there are these intangible meanings, aspects that if not understood can lead to a very unsustainable practice of conservation. So to begin with the traditional making of the traditional houses, traditionally the process of making and maintaining the havelis or houses of these poor houses as we know them in Ahmedabad involved a flow of information with reference to the purposes and behavior of the house. That included the traders, owners, architects, priests, and the craftsmen. These individuals embodied in themselves the knowledge of the behavior of the structure and spaces, scientific and philosophical lessons of life and architecture, the economic values of frugality, codes of social and environmental ethics, and tools for making. As described by Bhimrao Ratnamani Rao Jote as early as 1929, the trader or the merchant of Ahmedabad was industrious, shrewd, practical, and patient. He was self-reliant but cooperative, thrifty at home but charitable. He was not excitable, vain, or quarrelsome. But if dispute did arise, he would try to bring about a peaceful compromise so that the work could proceed. He was also part of guilds that organized and administered certain vital social institutions through traditional mechanisms of charity, thus making them a vital component of the city's administration. The trader was the person through whom the process of making of the house originated, as they were the ones to get materials from various forests, and in some cases, where the process terminated when the house was built for him. His contribution to the process was a source of the material flow and also in giving feedback with reference to the state of the origins of this resource. He organized, maintained, and managed the raw materials in terms of regulating its flow and standardizing it for efficiency, resulting into a resilient system of material flow. The owner of the house, as a house, appointed a priest whose role was to perform all the sacrificial rites during the process of conception and making of a structure. He was connected to religious discourses, man-nature relationships, limits to possession, and to the prevalent politics of the place. He thus brought in the purpose of the higher order into the day-to-day processes of making. The architect, or at that time known as the Sthapati, not only brought in his knowledge of the science of architecture and handed it down to the traditional lore from generation to generation, he is also to have the practical knowledge of the Shastras. He was to be a capable builder and skilled craftsman. Under him worked all craftsmen and surveyors who were architects' pupils, being educated into becoming the architects themselves. The role of the architect here was to bring the pursuit of excellence along with the ethics of practice and processes. The root of all creative processes in the traditional architecture was the craftsman. He was an organic element of the society, being part of the community he was building for. Knowledge and of this embedded understanding of what the built environment means to the community was embedded in the elements of the houses, and they were also named in the way that their structural role or functional role of that element gets codified for the owner. For example, the element between the base of the house and the column of the shaft of the shaft would be, which kind of takes the shear force is called indoni. Indoni in day-to-day use is a cloth pad that is used to support the water pots on the heads while transporting water from one well to another. So these are the kind of studies that some of the experts at CEPT University has done to decipher what do these terms mean, and in terms of either their structural use, in terms of how they need to repair, or in terms of their functional use. The second example that I'm going to talk about over here are some of the marginalized narratives of the urban fabric. The city in its urban fabric embodies many narratives that makes the structure of the city what it is, and the cultural flow for which the city is valued. The diversities that we recognize are embedded in this diverse urban fabric. This particular slide over here shows many abandoned structures that are uncared for due to not only neglect of the owners, but in some cases due to lack of thoughtful consideration of what is understood by people as valuable, but are generally marginalized by the larger greater World Heritage narratives. One such example is this wooden mosque that we are just now working on with our team at Center for Heritage Conservation. And we have converted this into a site school. That is a method we use in order to understand narratives that are otherwise not understood or not brought out in public. This wooden mosque is quite unique, and it's a very curious case. If you generally look at the mosques in Ahmedabad, they are stone mosques, and they generally have patronage have had patronage either by the king or by the noblemen. This is a wooden mosque, which is not seen in, it's one of the unique ones in Ahmedabad, but you do see wooden mosques in the coastal areas. So you see in Kutch, you see wooden mosques in Khambat. So this particular wooden mosque possibly tells us a narrative of a community of believers in Islam that came from the sea route. Ahmedabad is usually known for its glory because of the way the knowledge transferred through the Silk Route. But this is one unique example that tells us that there are other narratives embedded which we are otherwise not understanding. The third case is of these different gendered narratives and also caste and class narratives that are embedded within the structure of the city, which we otherwise do not recognize. The primary, most visible structure of the city, as we understand, is underlaid with two other parts of the city, or other path structures that were a result of specific gender hierarchies and caste hierarchies of the society. In this diagram, you'll see the blue is what we understand generally as the structure of the city, that the main street, the pores, the khadkis. But if you see the green line here, you'll see that it kind of transcends various pores and various khadkis and practically connects from one pore to another or one neighborhood to another without having to touch the main road. You'll also see the other brown line over here, which kind of is the back alleys that we know, and we very romantically call them chinies, used for climate purposes. As documented in the narratives of various historians and as discussed with communities living there, the primary streets were bazaars that were essentially accessed by traders coming from outside the city. The secondary streets within the pore were either special markets or markets for domestic products accessed by residents of the pole. Women of the city generally were never encouraged to be on these streets unless they were there for some specific purpose. The places for interacting with other women were streets and chalk within the pole. Most of these pole, while they had only one visible access pole gate, also had small connections from within the pole, from within to other poles, sometimes through the khadki, which is a kind of a small door from one pole to another, in some cases through houses. So there are houses that open on two sides. The women of the city usually access other pole through these small connections, forming another layer of path structure. They were not, as per caste structure, there's a third layer of the path structure that is formed in the back alleys, which were accessed by the people who cleaned the city. As per the caste structure, they were not to be seen or they were not to be mingling with the higher castes, and thus their movement was carefully addressed through minimal overlaps with other movements. These path structures were throughout the history of the city used as alternative ways of moving during the time of conflict and are quoted by many as their usefulness during the independence struggles. Many of these spaces, on one hand, are not recognized, but when recognized, are encroached upon in the name of authentic experiences for the tourists. And in some way, it takes away the rights of the people who otherwise access these streets and these places as public places. They take away their rights of accessibility. What this kind of, what not recognizing the marginalized narratives or alternative path structures or meanings behind the processes does is that when discussing heritage as sense of place or urban heritage as sense of place, we usually end up talking about it as an aesthetic concept that talks about the personality of the space, and that is what is implied as heritage narrative usually. What we forget is the place as a space felt, as understood, and associated with memories of people. We forget the sense of right of people to be in that place, a political sense of being in a part of social world. A very common narrative of that is when we say women need to know their place. That's a sense of political place that is meant, and that is usually embedded in the structures of the city as well. We don't recognize place as a cultural creation, as a perception of shared history, as a sense of place attachment. We don't understand the place, the potential of sense of place to create a sense of citizenship for the people who are not only living there, but people who are going to migrate in those places. We recognize heritage as a cultural resource, but we only recognize it as for its purpose of cultural exchange through a self-conscious elite experience. Values and identities, public histories that may or may not be associated with the dominant narratives or even historic knowledge is something that we don't recognize that easily. We don't recognize cultural innovation, we don't recognize rights, not only to continue to practice the culture, but the right to change it and to transition into a modern world is as much a right of people who are living in these places. We recognize culture as an economic or cultural heritage or intangible heritage and tangible heritage as economic resource. We only recognize it as a resource for tourism and for it as a consumption of authentic experience. We are yet to recognize it as a livelihood network that is present in a social domain that affords better living condition for people who are there. Right, once again, we don't recognize the right of economic production of meanings, right, of choice of employment, to continue that employment. Often we complain that the next generation of people who are practicing a particular cultural heritage do not want to continue it. We do not recognize their right to not wanting to continue it as well either, and their right to continue or not continue it. I will end with this framework that based on many experiences I have arrived at. I've used the equity framework that was established for sustainable development by Houghton in 1996, I think, or it was 1999. I may be mistaken. He identified 5 layers of equity: intragenerational equity, intergenerational equity, transnational equity, procedural equity. He also recognized interspecies equity, which would be a very important aspect to look at when you're looking at sites that have a dominant natural narrative as well. This I had prepared specially for urban landscapes or historic urban areas, and where I had looked at how each of these aspects of equity would play out in the way people would access sense of place at a cultural site, would access the site as a site or an artifact as a cultural resource, or how people would access a site as an economic resource. What I found is through my research that usually it is the transnational equity, which is experience of the visitors who are coming from outside to this place, is valorized over rights of people who are living in the place and their access to culture and their access to cultural heritage. It's usually the personality of the geographic location, the scale, the proportion, the visual integrity, the cross-cultural engagement, the consumption of authentic experience, and the economic restructuring to make heritage accessible is what is valorized. I'm not saying they are not important. I think they're extremely important, and they do make a part of this very important matrix. but it is important to recognize all these other aspects of what heritage does, cultural heritage does, to everybody who accesses it while studying it and then while acting on it. What we do at our center and at our program when we are teaching, we use this framework as something that helps us in addressing all these various aspects. Thank you very much. I hope I've not excessed my time. Thank you.
Well, that's fine. Thank you very much, Jigna. Thank you for bringing out this very important perspective on looking at what makes an urban space a place for people to whom heritage belongs. And you illustrated it so well through Ahmedabad's case. Now, let's move now to our neighboring country, Sri Lanka, and visit the historic city of Kandy. And I have extreme privilege and honor to introduce architect Prasanna B. Ratnaike, who is the architect, heritage manager, and conservator. He has 23 years of experience in managing and conserving Sri Lanka's cultural heritage as Director Conservation and Additional Director General at the Department of Archaeology. He has many qualifications to him and has been trained as a heritage manager at ICROM, at ACCU Nara, WITRAP, and several other institutions. He's also serving as a visiting academic member of the Department of History and Archaeology at the University of Sri Jayawardhanapura, the Department of Architecture of the University of Varathuva. Over to you, Prasanna, please.
Thank you. I think you can hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Thank you, Rohit, for your introduction. And today I'm going to talk about Kandy. Wait for the slide, sharing my slide. So, okay, can you see me?
Yes, you can just get
okay.
to your slide. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Kandy. I call it the cultural city of Sri Lanka. And it's a great pleasure for me to speak in this international webinar organized by Indian ICOMOS. And thank you, Indian ICOMOS, for inviting me to do this speech. And Kandy, being my hometown, I am much proud to present this interesting story. And I will explain why I call it a cultural city. This city of Kandy, it's located in the central hills of Sri Lanka. And when the capital was established in Kandy, all the coastal areas were under Dutch. Although the city, that as a town, it was established in the 14th century, it became a capital in the early 18th century. It was the last capital of Sri Lanka until the country came under the British Empire in 1815. Kandy is a World Heritage City. In 1988, the city of Kandy has been listed in the World Heritage List by the UNESCO World Heritage Center under the criterions 4 and 6. In the identification of the outstanding universal values, both the tangible and intangible values have been taken into consideration under these two criterions. And it is important that those outstanding universal values are well managed, it's happy to say, by those different stakeholder parties, due to the main reason, the Kandy is highly recognized as a national iconic city, as a cultural city. That's the main reason for protecting those values. Kandy, in the history, it became the last kingdom of Sri Lanka, starting from Anuradhapura in the 3rd century BC. The capital city shifted towards southern and wet zone due to some invasions from South India and other reasons like malaria and all the diseases. And finally to the central hills for better protection, especially from the Europeans who established their power in the coastal areas in 17th and 18th centuries. Actually, Kandy is a designed city by call. It is designed by a local architect. Especially the palace and the city layout is designed by the local architect called Devendra Moolachari, who was a descendant of a traditional artisan family. His concept was to create a heaven for the king. Therefore, he converted the paddy field into a man-made lake, and in between the lake and the palace complex, he created a cloud wall, and someone would seem as if it is floating in the sky. It is, and also it is decided to protect the forest strip above the palace as a sanctuary and also a catchment area for the lake. I think you will agree with the architect's concept, how he has succeeded his concept wonderfully. Even today, his concept is in practice. Kandy as a Buddhist center, the sacred tooth relic is the symbol of sovereignty of Sri Lanka throughout the history. Even the British respected the local belief that whoever owns and protects the sacred tooth relic has the right to rule the country. Therefore, they had provided all the protection and had allowed all traditions, including the annual pageant in August in every year. And in addition to the main temple, there are 2 large residential complexes, you see, and also there are 4 other main temples dedicated to the deities who believe to be the protectors of the sacred tooth relic of the Buddha. And also, Kandy can be considered as a multi-religious city. Even during the Kandyan kingdom, in the king's time, the Hindu religious activities were involved in most of the rituals related to the sacred tooth relic. Therefore, the last kings were from India, and they were related to India. And even today, the final day of the annual pageant, there are some rituals connected to the Pilayar Hindu temple, which is 1 kilometer away from the main temple. And also during the British period, they built the St. Paul's Church very close to the Temple of Tooth Relic, but still conducting the services. And also there's a mosque, a big mosque built in the land belongs to the temple, where the Muslims of the city pray still. Therefore, it's a multi-religious place. And being the capital city for long time, it's a business center. Even before building the Temple of Tooth Relic, the lower levels of the city has been laid with several streets in grid pattern. You can see these grid patterns very clearly. These are some maps from various periods, and in the city, in the streets, there were houses of the chieftains and also the business premises. And during the British period, it was converted into a commercial city and developed as a business area to collect local products and also to sell the imported products brought from Colombo by carts and later by trains. And due to the surrounding area with high mountains, there's no space to expand this small town, Kandy city. Therefore, recently, most of the crowded spaces like those administrative centers and market areas, they were shifted outwards the other side of the river. There's a river flowing right around from 3 sides of the city, and those places were located the other side of the river, allowing This city limits to keep space for retail, tourism, religious, recreational purposes, which enhances the cultural identity. It's a good decision in the town planning. And Kandy as a cultural center, Kandy is visited by thousands of pilgrims, tourists, and other visitors daily throughout the history. Even during King's time and the British period, there were places of like restaurants and rest houses for the visitors. And being the most sacred place for the world Buddhists, foreign pilgrims visit Kandy. Foreign visitors from Japan, Bhutan, Nepal, Korea, China, those countries. And also for the school children, local school children, despite their race or religion, Kandy is a place of visit during their educational tours. That's not depend on their race or religion. It's a place to visit. It's a must place. This enhances the development of local traditional arts and crafts, and there are many economically advantageous opportunities in the tourism for these crafts people and artists. It is very interesting to talk about this the main street of Kandy. It is called the Dalanda Vidi. Dalanda means the street of sacred tooth relic. It starts from the temple and ends at the clock tower. There's an iconic clock tower built in early 19th century. And the main street of Kandy, the Dalanda Vidi, also plays a major role in the city's social cultural lifestyle. There are shady walkways along the street, and it allows space for recreation, gathering, moving, and entertaining. And you can see these two pictures from early 1900s and the present picture. The similar activities are there. Only change with these modes of transports. It has converted from carts to the motor vehicles. This is a very interesting picture. This recently, the first picture is when it was in the lockdown last week, and this is just after the country was opened. Just after the next day, it is fully crowded, and it said that this is a must place of visit, essential street in the city. And daily rituals and activities. The temple offers 3 daily alms offerings to the sacred tooth relics, morning, midday, and evening, followed by traditional drumming that is unique to the temple. And pilgrims eagerly participate in those pujas, believing that they are contributing to the most sacred and highly meritorious act in their life. And there's a tradition of offering the newly born babies to the sacred tooth relic after 6 months from the birth. It's a tradition in the country. And the religious activities and the administration of the temple is managed by a lay custodian and the prelates of 2 main temples. And the most interesting thing is the annual pageant. It's called the Perahera. The annual pageant is the most attractive event in the city of Kandy, which gathers thousands of visitors from all over the world in every August. This colorful pageant moves along the street of Kandy for 7 days. After initial pageant, there's a small pageant at the temple premises for another 7 days at the beginning. The pageant comprises of 5 major segments. The main pageant is from the main temple, the temple of Truth, and there are the 4 pageants from the small temples belong to those deities. All these pageants consist of dancers, drummers, flute players, fire dancers, and nicely decorated elephants and tuskers. It's very interesting. There are about 100 I think nearly 100 elephants participate in this pageant. And those artists who perform in the Perahera, the pageant, they perform in their highest skills. They like to show their highest skills. The lay custodian walks in his traditional costume. You can see him here. And in his traditional costume, followed by the set of elephants who carries the relic casket on back. And it was customary to report about the annual festival to the king, and following the tradition, still the lay custodian and other officials submit the report to the head of the state, the president. And also the well-performed artists are awarded with gifts and certificates to encourage them for the continuation of the traditions. And it is considered that they are awarded with the highest awards by the president. And with parallel to the main temple activities, there are another 32 rural temples dedicated to deities, both local and Indian, within the kingdom of Kandy. Those temples also have similar traditions to conduct pageants just after the Kandy event in August. There are also lay custodians of these temples, and they also participate in the main pageant in Kandy. And most importantly, there are lands allocated by the kings for these temples, and these lands are leased out or rented out for the people to live, and in return they perform and they serve for the maintenance, both in for the physical maintenance of those structures, and also to conduct the rituals. Those people, they are bound to do the those services, and it's a great strength for the sacred tooth relic even to have these temples in continuing the traditional rituals and for generations. There are several arts and crafts related to these temples, and now it has become a livelihood of those people. And being the major tourist attraction, pilgrims place and business center, Kandy has become a commercial hub for the products for all these traditional arts. There are craft sale centers belongs to both the public and private sector organizations. And also most of the tourist hotel, they have souvenir shops, and also they conduct live cultural shows, the dancing shows for the tourists. It is a great help for them to continue with their traditions, and otherwise they will abandon, or they will not willing to do these traditional arts and crafts as they are not getting enough income from them. Therefore, they get a good way of income. And there are traditional arts and craft villages around Kandy. It is much interesting to see that most of those Sri Lankan traditional arts and crafts are located around Kandy. And even today, the livelihoods of the people in some of those villages are traditional crafts and arts, even among these changing socio-cultural and economic situations. And also there are traditional villages dedicated for dancing, drumming, wood carving, brass work, jewelry, mat weaving, pottery, lacquer work, bamboo craft, and many other crafts, very close proximity to Kandy. And to continue with this system, it is very important to safeguard these intangible heritage sector artists, to protect those people. Therefore, to do that, there are several systems implemented. It is natural that with the global socio-cultural economic changes, most of the traditions are disappearing from the society. It is common to Sri Lanka as well. But understanding the difficulties and importance of safeguarding those traditions and arts and crafts, several programs have been implemented. There are several schools of arts and crafts, and also there are ways of income generation avenues are shown to them. In addition to introducing new methods and technology in their arts and crafts, and also most importantly, close to the Kandy city, there are artists' villages have been established for the better maintenance of the those activities. Therefore, the relevant government institutions, they can easily engage and easily help them. Now it comes to the end of my presentation, and it is clear with my simple explanation, the most of these visually highlighting built structures like those architectural masterpieces like those the Temple of Truth Relic and other the Kandy city and all the other structures, they are we call their tangible heritage. They are nourished by the intangible skills. We can't say that without these intangible skills we can't maintain those tangible heritage, especially those structures and also the activities related to both the religious, cultural, social activities. Therefore, they are interdependent. That's the real truth.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you
for listening to my speech, and hope you will visit Sri Lanka and especially to Kandy just after this pandemic situation. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prasanna. Thank you for this very, very eloquent presentation and explaining how tangible and intangible coexist in Kandy and how we need to have a more holistic strategy for managing such places. So we will, of course, all be coming together for the panel discussion after the last presentation. And for that, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Mr. Surya Narayan Murthy and Mr. Abdul Bari. So Mr. Murthy is specialized in documenting Indian traditional building and historical building knowledge systems. He has worked on projects across India in various states in varied capacities for human settlements, infrastructure planning and development, and has also published several papers on various themes. Abdul Bari has been involved in contemporary architectural design as main focus and placemaking in built environment. He also has had experience in adaptive reuse and has been engaged with various design initiatives in cities and has considerable hands-on experience. So without further ado, let me invite Mr. Murthy and Mr. Bari to make their presentation, please. If you can move to the slideshow and you can start presenting.
Just give me a second. Excuse me, sir. I think Mr. Murthy is muted by the organizer. He needs to be unmuted.
I think he can unmute himself. If he can just click below and he can unmute himself.
Yeah, thank you. So we can start the presentation. Thank you, Rohit, for kind words. And I thank NSC ICH and ICOMOS India for inviting us in this. Without going into further introduction, so we would like to start upon this definition of intangible cultural heritage. As per UNESCO, It includes the practices, representations, and expressions, knowledge, and skills that combine the instruments, objects, artifacts, cultural spaces that are associated with the communities. So most importantly, with the communities. This is manifested in the oral traditions and expressions, where language is a vehicle, and which includes language as a vehicle for the transmission of intangible cultural heritage and display of intangible cultural heritage, continuity and network linking that happens in the intangible cultural heritage. And most importantly, and where we are going to demonstrate in this 3 case studies, the social practices, rituals, and festive events, which are most of the time happen as an annual cycle, which can be seen in the, so it is like sun rising in the east. So annually, what happens to these culturally vibrant cities? Annually, every day, every month, annually, what happens to these cities? That is Amritsar, Hyderabad, and Shahjahanabad, Delhi, the core Shahjahanabad area. These are the 3 places that we would like to demonstrate in this presentation. And this is going to also show us heritage and culture as a resource, as moved from values based to this culture as a resource, like natural resource. Culture itself is a resource for use, for consumption, for towards development, towards growth. Yeah, next. Next, please. And this is the people playing a key role in the intangible. So the people-centric, as also pointed out by our keynote speaker, Gamini, the people playing the key role in displaying, in participating, in creating these places, which also reflects the time, as I mentioned in the beginning, that annual cycle or the yearly cycle or day cycle of the cultural life makes the place, makes the people, which creates the combination with all these as an identity of a place, that is reflected as an identity of a place. Yeah, we'll go to the next. And in all these places, there is this connectedness of identity that is visible in these culturally vibrant landscapes. So what we see is life always connected with the tangible components of place, like identity, identification, the place making. We identify the place, we recognize the place, which we remember the place, we locate the place, and these are all connected to people, activities that happen in these places, the crafts that that are molding these places, the food that happens in this place, sounds, music, simple sounds of activities, simple sounds of life, and morning time, afternoon time, evening time, festival time. These are all intangible elements which always connect and display in these landscapes. Next. As already pointed out, sustainable development goals of UNESCO, which emphasize the participatory and integrated approach for planning and management of culturally vibrant places for sustainability in human settlements. So in other words, places can be sustainable if there is an inclusion of participatory method and participatory planning and integrated approach in planning. The first step in safeguarding in that sense, if we look at from the statement, in safeguarding the intangible cultural heritage is mainly to due to the if we are able to identify this appropriately, the key component of that intangible aspect, and assessing that, so that we address that as a main tool and strategy towards safeguarding heritage, safeguarding intangible, and it connects the tangible always. Addressing sustainability. Next. And in Habitat 3 of 2016, where the new urban agenda emphasizes that culture mainly defines the human development, or the cultural diversity that is happening in these places, cities, that is the source of enrichment for people, for the city. So that is culture is as a priority component of urban plans. Culture as a priority component and as a strategy. So that means that becomes the planning tool, management tool, culture, people. That is becoming as a planning tool, because we take land use and natural resources, availability of the natural resources as the primary step, but at the same time, culture itself can, if it is treated as an appropriate resource, and that becomes a priority component in our urban plans. So next, please. So as mentioned, the dynamics of this that happens when we say value in these places, value can be attributed to economics of the place, culture of the place, and the space. Space itself is always connected to time. A historic city of Hyderabad, 16th century historic city of Hyderabad, and Shahjahanabad and Amritsar, where the streets, the main historic town leading towards Golden Temple, have been attempted by the government during various years. Hyderabad had been happening since the year 2000. Even now, there are certain things happening in terms of projects where tangible and intangible dynamics can be seen in economy and cultural aspects. Shahjahanabad, we are aware since last 20 years, and which is materializing slowly now, and Amritsar, which had been in the news since the year 2012, where there was a streetscaping that was materialized under tourism development, where Heritage Street had been planned, where we were practically involved with the people, local people, in documenting these places, in locating these places, and inventorying these communities and places closely. What we realized is there is this complete interrelationship with various aspects of local community, governance, redevelopment, and tourism. So I request Abdul Bari, my colleague, who also had been part of this work along with me since last 10-12 years. I request him to take over and present this further.
Thank you, sir. I think for the talk that I'm going to give ahead, we'll basically keep two things in mind. The keynote speaker actually gave a very appropriate phrase of people as focus. And Mr. Murthy has just now given the second most important phrase, that is culture as resource. So if you just keep these two in mind, while I present the rest of the slides, and I'll come back to these two things to culminate what we want to contribute to this series. What you see here on the screen is basically a sort of a framework that we always keep in the back of our mind while we are working on these various cities, which is Hyderabad, Shahjahanabad, and Amritsar. Mainly because we do not see these works that we are engaged in as projects. These are mostly seen as plans because it's sort of a continuation, which has a life of its own. And as environments change, as political situations change, these spaces, tend to adapt, and with them we also tend to adapt our thinking and evolve ourselves professionally and also, as communities. So the framework has basically these components of local community, tourism, local business, parking, street vendors, streetscape, modernization, regulation, governance, and redevelopment. And we have sort of established, vague linkages between each of these, and how together they form a loop, which basically starts with the local community and ends with the local community. Now, the keynote speaker mentioned people as the focus, and I would like to take it a bit further, saying that people can be, vaguely be divided into a local community aspect and a tourist aspect. And from what we have been seeing in most of the government interventions, that the redevelopment efforts, of course, tend to be monument driven. But local community is supposed to be more important because they are the ones who are actually sustaining the place. Now, this fact is mostly missed in most of the redevelopment efforts. I mean, it's there in the back of the mind, but it does not manifest itself in what comes on ground. Local community, of course, is very closely related with the local business, and the local business again is very closely related with the tourism activity that happens. So it's generally understood that the tourism revenue is the reason why most of the interventions are able to take place in the historic regions. But most redevelopment plans, most management plans, or most conservation plans that we have been seeing around tend to focus mainly on tourism. They put tourism in the center of all their planning and stuff, whereas we strongly feel that the local community has to be the focus of all the intervention that is happening. And of course tourism will stay, but the main the major group or the major part of the whole conservation strategy has to be the local community, because again, the intangible part of the heritage is being driven and is being sustained by the local community itself. The local business again connected very strongly with the parking facilities that are provided in these. It's mostly space constraints, but we have realized that parking tends to be the major obstacle in any redevelopment effort that eventually comes on ground. Parking again is very closely related to the street maintenance activity, which of course is the life of the most vibrant part of any precinct that you would go to in a historic setup. But very rarely, the focus is given onto those group of people who are actually the life of the whole heritage scenario that is being, the whole heritage narrative that is being, promoted. Street mending, of course, again, very closely related to the whole streetscape effort. Most of the streetscape, proposals tend to be more on the beautification side than on actually providing the amenities and the facilities that these street vendors require. Standing in the heat all through the summer. The sir mentioned about the annual cultural cycle. There is an annual cultural climatic cycle as well, which needs to be taken into account while planning or planning for street vendors and the streetscape. Streetscape, again, closely related to the modernization. It's a very real challenge that architects face. The interventions in historic zones, marketplaces, which have a historic character, whereas the people or the shopkeepers, tend to have more contemporary aspirations and want to be up there with the rest of the, developed part of the city. How do you convince them to, stay within the coherence of their environment? How do they see value in it? Do they really actually see value in it or not?
Abdul, we have just 2 minutes left, so if you can please wind up. Thank you very much.
Modernization related to regulation, again, we see blanket bylaws. I think if we have to rush through, and I have to make the two important points that I am trying to make here, is that we have to see local community not only as a stakeholder, but mostly as a beneficiary of the whole redevelopment and the cultural conservation efforts, because they are the main people who are actually responsible for the upkeep and the management of their zone. The concluding statement says that when a community is given ownership for their livelihood within the capacity the physical form and the natural habitat offers, it will by its own virtue assume the role and responsibility of maintaining the balance. Balance in this case is of course translated into sustainability. The other point that we would like to stress upon is when Sir mentioned that there is an annual cultural cycle to these cities. That cultural resource is actually a leverage through which these interventions can be brought to life. To show you an example, this is the idea of the pedestrianization in Hyderabad, which is more than 2 decades old, and it has sort of manifested itself into this sort of a translation of how the pedestrianization aspect has come on ground. Whereas if you compare this intervention to this event which happens annually, this is the Muharram procession which happens around Saminar. You see there is very less correlation between what has happened on ground and the actual cultural life which goes on in the city. Of course, this is an event which happens once in a year, but along with this, there are many processions in other religious groups which happen in the same area. Does the redevelopment effort take that into account, and how can it actually do that? So our contention in our contribution to this series is that if you take the cultural resource or the annual cultural cycle as the element around which these ideas can be brought into execution, you might be able to mobilize people and the local community in a better way, because people tend to come around at these times and they anyway do it. We remember that when the CPP project, the Charminar project actually went on ground, it happened to be just the first week of the month of Ramadan, where people were just getting ready to decorate their shops and their streets and stuff, and the digging was going on parallel. Now, obviously, any community will look at that intervention as more tourist-centric rather than local community-centric, because in their heads, Ramadan is the most important month of the year, and that is when they require the peace and all of that. So, in hindsight, if the management had taken into account that there is a month or there is a festival approaching, and we might be able to mobilize people towards the redevelopment before that event occurred, people would have been more cooperative and would have been able to come together to help more in those efforts. And that's how the local community gets involved in the whole redevelopment effort. And that is how they take ownership of their own city, their street, their shop. And that's how the sustainability cycles can be mobilized. We have seen this happen in the Amritsar project, where we were associated in a very small portion of the entire enterprise, but the Golden Temple was sort of the driving element in bringing the people together. The moment when we went around the shop, doing our case studies and stuff, the moment we said, Golden Temple ke liye kaam ho raha hai, everybody sort of backed out and said, yes, that's something which is important to us, and whatever is being done for the upkeep and for the upliftment of that, we are ready to do. We are ready to cooperate for that. The same sort of spirit was absent in Hyderabad and Shahanabad, because there was no central element around which the community could be mobilized. And I think there are many opportunities of doing that in any sort of a historic setup, and those opportunities are mostly provided by the annual cultural cycle. If we plan to integrate those aspects of climate and culture into our redevelopment and management plan, I think we will have a better chance of seeing more culturally and historically relevant intervention in historic zone. So I'll just end with these photographs of what the intangible culture actually manifests into around these heritage. This is again the BBA Azam procession in Hyderabad. This is a regular scene on any evening after iftar time, outside Jama Masjid in Shahanabad. And this is, of course, a regular day at Golden Temple.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Abdul and Mr. Suryanarayan, for the presentation. So I am going to quickly jump to the panel discussion, and I would like all the panelists to switch on their videos so we can all see them. And then I'm going to pose one question, which I request all the panelists to respond. Because of the time limitation, I would request not to exceed 1 minute for your intervention. So it will be a speed dating exercise. I'm just joking. 1 minute for each response. And I'm going to say the question. What, according to you, are the two most important tools or strategies that we should be thinking of further developing with the aim of holistic consideration of tangible and intangible heritage for the sustainable conservation and management of historic cities in South Asia? So maybe we start with Gamini. If he's there, maybe he can say, you already mentioned something in the last slide, but maybe you can say quickly again, just to review it. Thank
yes, looking at the people working with the two conventions and perhaps looking at some of our programs, I think taking the policy on sustainable development by UNESCO, I think that can be a useful tool to work. Of course, we have a lot of work to do. It's not just these are like you were talking about theory and practice, but there are some of these are only theory. And you people like Shikha will have to relate them to the practice on ground. And we can, in Rome, in Paris, in London, we can talk about all these things, but these things have come from to be realities at the ground level. So yes, that's perhaps one tool in that I mentioned the people-centered approaches to conservation that we are working on, which brings in all these aspects of sustainable development and various other things, nature, culture, people, all this. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. So Dr. Chauhan, maybe we can have your views.
Thanks, Rohit. I think in a nutshell, we have stakeholders vertically as well as horizontally. And these stakeholders should be engaged because, there are more than 3 departments involved. Unless the vision for center staging cultural, intangible and tangible heritage is shared by all, implementation will suffer. So for the purpose of, reshaping policy by bringing all the 3 policies together, whether it's urban, whether it's cultural and tourism, all of them together. And then the strategy also should be formulated together. And then the capacity building. For instance, you have the Hriday toolkit and you have others, the HUL approach, etc. Unless this melting pot is created by creating platforms of regular engagement, it will not work. Even we know that the city has cultural heritage, which is tremendous, it will not work. The second thing is having cultural heritage interpretation centers at every such site. Like the Ramsar wetlands have tourist interpretation centers, it is very important that the visitor understands the profundity of what he is going to visit. And of course, the cultural do's and don'ts will be imparted right there and then. If you get these right, vertically and horizontally, you're on the right track.
Okay, maybe we will move to our Dr. Shikha Jain. Shikha, maybe you can.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am already, since we experimented with the historic urban landscape tools, but it's not that, these tools are any different from others, as, Dr. Gamini has explained. For me, the most important tool is civic engagement, community participation. And I think nothing can work without that. No planning tool, no regulatory framework, nothing. So that is the most critical, I feel. And yes, UNESCO designations work as important tools. I never associate with them with branding or anything, though that's what usually people feel. But I think they are very important tools because both the stakeholders like the government sector as well as the local residents keep asking, so how does UNESCO evaluate? So what do we have to do? So I think these are very important tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shikha. How about you, Jigna? What are your views on this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm being very hopeful here, but I think because there's a lot of discussion that is going on in the chat, I'm being quite hopeful here, but I think one of the very useful tools that we have found as an institution, it is easy to do. I understand as from a government body, it's not easy to do. But we found the tool of creating partnerships with cultural institutions that kind of hold, that have a good hold and good understanding of the community. That has worked really well. So most of these community institutions, some of them are religious, some of them are non-religious, but they understand the practices of conservation. They understand the practices of building. They understand the language. They understand what places are useful at what time, even when they are not part of the recognizable festivals, that they are part of day-to-day spiritual relationships. So what we found is that engagement with these cultural institutions are an extremely important tool to go further. Somehow, if that can be extended also, that partnership can be extended maybe through institutions or outside institutions with the site managers, that would be quite useful.
Great, thanks so much, Jigna. Prasanna, how about you?
My experience, I think this all this intangible input in the tangible heritage, it is actually, it's truly based on the traditional system. There's no any institutional or legal framework until now. I think it's better. It is not recognized or respected by the authorities or the professionals. I think we should implement such a system to recognize their skills, because some temples, they are more than nearly 1,000 years old, but still maintained by those traditional craftsmen and traditional intangible skills. Therefore, there should be a way of recognizing or regularizing these things to for the better, I think, to continue it for another 1,000 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prasanna. So, Abdul or Surya Narayan, if you have something to say on this question.
Yeah, I think mainly as we defined that there is something called this cultural cycle is like a natural climatic cycle. I feel that cultural cycle is connected to closely with people. This has inherent capacity to engage the local community collectively. So a lot of these sustainable interventions, they can be planned through this strategy of engaging and mobilizing this cultural cycle, annual cultural cycle, which is very much natural in the culture. That I think this has to be used as a tool and strategy by administrators, governance, government institutions. I think that is the take. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Surya. So I think we have got some very interesting insights from this response from all the panelists. And it seems like we really need to have more examples from our region, which we can put forward to show how we can actually, there are generic tools now enough that we have been discussed and debated, but what we need to now see is how do we contextualize them and really make them implementable, so that maybe we don't have to always follow examples from outside our region as the best practices. We have enough already there. Maybe there is also a need to document what we have been doing more, because it's not that we have not been doing. We have, as we already know, there are many good practices. Some of them are done very formally, some are informal, but we need to put them out for the others to know what worked, how did they work, and what were the factors that made them work. So I will conclude with one last question to you, Gaviniji. In fact, there is this question targeted to you, which maybe you can give this concluding remarks as a response to this question, which is, I will just read it out. So there have been these evolution of various approaches, which you also highlighted in your presentation. While moving from fabric-centric approach to people-centric approach is really an improvement in our thought process. Culture has not been only about people, but rather people's coexistence or response and relationship with nature and its resources, with other people in the value chain, etc. In the light of growing movements which speak to the rights of nature, rights of rivers, etc., is saying culture should be saying culture should be people centric enough, or should we speak of it being coexistence centric? Your mention of the SDGs does bring this into the whole discussion, and would love to hear your thoughts. So maybe you can say a few words on elaborating on the people-centered approach that you highlight.
Thank you for that question. Who raised that, Rohit. Indeed, this terminology, these words, you can still change, you can still improve. And particularly look at our region, look at Asia, look at South Asia. Please do change, do improve them. There's no question. And it's all about coexistence. Yes, indeed. The program we started with living heritage and people-centered approaches at ECROM. Now they call it people, nature, culture. This is precisely, it is happening, and it is the way to go about the relationships, coexistence, and all these things are absolutely essential to go forward. And it is no way that's why I said we should stop this divide and rule sort of situation where all these things have been done. We had nature and culture divided, and we now, it's funny because we started by dividing and we now try to integrate. We divided nature and culture because it came from the Western world. And there was this person in one of our meetings. We had this person from China, the lady, some of you know her. She said, well, for 5,000 years or so, we never had a division between nature and culture. Suddenly, World Heritage came and divided it. And we were told there is natural heritage, and there is cultural heritage. So like that. Yes, thank you for that question. It's about coexistence. But then, of course, all these things, as I said, we need to work collectively. We need to work together. We need to, as Rohit very well said, document what we have been doing and share what we have been doing and improve what we have to do more further. So I wish you all the best with that, your effort and your good work. I can see. I mean, this is the first time we saw your work, Shikha. I mean, and Abdul and Jigna. I mean, this is first time we saw these things, and these are things that we should share, we should promote, and this is great opportunity. Thank you, Niyati. Thank you, and the team of ICOMOS. I think we can do something. We can go forward. In fact, let me also remind you that these people, the living heritage, I showed you a slide, and people-centered approaches and so on are being considered as non-Western paradigms that we introduced to the course. So Rohit was there from the beginning, and now he's continuing after I left. So this is something that we all should work together. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your words of encouragement. That Dr. Chauhan has also made a very important point that culture is people, and undoubtedly, but preservation is not necessarily driven by them alone. So that's also a very important point. So thank you very much for all the contributions you have been making. As we have been saying, we will be documenting all this, so it will be all coming together in a publication as well. So hopefully we will be able to continue these discussions, take them further in the future webinars that we will do as part of these series. And we look forward to connecting not only to our members within India, but also to our neighbors with whom we share so much of heritage and culture and values. And it's all the important for us to really work together. because we have common challenges and common experiences. So thank you very much once again. Please stay safe and we will be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Meenal, can you take over?
I thank all the participants for joining us in today's highly engaging sessions on the theme of tools and strategies, role of intangible cultural heritage in sustainability of historic town. Now, I would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Gamini, Dr. Purnima Chauhan, Dr. Shikha Jain, Architect Prasanna B. Ratnaike, Dr. Jigna Desai, Professor GSV Suryanarayan Modi, and Architect Abdul Bari. I would also like to thank Dr. Rohit Jagyasu for moderating the second session of E-Symposium and Dr. Arun Manning for opening address. I thank our partner institute, Department of Architecture, Planning and Design, IIT BHU, and Center of Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, for extending their support. I extend a special thanks to Naveen Piplani, President ICOMOS, for his support. I thank Dr. Rima Huja, Vice President, President ICOMOS India. I thank all the members of Executive Committee and NSC counselors, Architect Shailini Das Gupta, Secretary ICOMOS, and Priyanka ma'am. Lastly, I would like to thank the organizing team for today's event. So, Lakshmi R, Monalisa Bharadwaj, Lipika Khanna, Zarna Shah, Sukrit Sen, Kritika, Varsha, Sananya Darshini, EPWG, Sukanya Sharma, Aditi Rai, and Nagar Sheikh. Thank you for sharing your works and making this session a success. We would be inviting to the next intangible heritage as a driver for sustainability through tourism in historic town on 10th July. We are looking forward to your participation. Thank you.